Fellow says, you're using evidence, proof, etc. Is anthropology a non-science? Well, evidence is not a part of science. Okay, evidence is equal to proof, belief. It's what a prosecutor uses to persuade, convince, convert, recruit the jury. That's the purpose of evidence. Now, that doesn't stop you from going out there and using evidence, for example, in paleontology, where you find a certain bone in a certain layer of the rock, fossil, and you say, well, this was approximately 60,000 years ago. And you're going to use that as a foundation for an assumption, okay, for a theory, but you're going to use it as an assumption. In other words, you're going to say, I'm going to assume that this bone belongs to so-and-so, and it was approximately 60,000 years ago. That's the way you got to look at it. It's not that you believe in it, it's that it forms the hypothesis that you're going to use on which you're going to base your theory. Okay, so no, it's not a question of belief. It's a question of it becoming part of the assumptions. Okay, on with the subject. Specifically here we have something about the Neanderthals and the Denisovans. Some fossils that were found in a Russian cave very close to the border with Mongolia. Okay, and so Fowle says, Neanderthals wore clothes. Then he corrects himself. He says, my bad. I was thinking about the sewing needles of the Denisovans from 50,000 years ago. Technically, not Neanderthals. Yeah, I guess they had, all these catwalks in those days, men trying different clothes. And yeah, probably you're right as well. Maybe the designers were all gay, just like in today. It's days of today, No, I don't think I don't think they wore clothes at all. None of them. The first animals to use clothes were humans, and I think no other animal ever invented clothes and had any need for it. Everyone was in his own world, in his own environment, and that was sufficient for them. They got used to it after thousands of years of acclimatization. There was no need for any animal to use clothes, except humans that suddenly went up north into Europe and they found out it was kind of cold out there. And I think they went up north because they were probably following some kind of herd looking for food. Those days it was an issue of food almost exclusively. Okay, so these humans, which are going to become the Cro-Magnons, Cro-Magnon in Europe, they were subsistence hunter-gatherers. All they did was hunt and fish, maybe. Maybe they did some gathering. Most of it was hunting. That's why they had those spears. Okay, spears were not used to hunt lettuce or tomato. Okay. Anyways, this fellow is referring to this when he's talking about a needle, and I talked about that a little bit in the past. Here's the needle they found, and you can see that small hole in the needle. Okay. And it says the needle is seen providing proof that the long-gone Denisovans named after the cave were more sophisticated than previously believed. Okay, I don't think Denisovans made this. Okay, and let me tell you why. Look at on the side. It says the bracelet. They found a bracelet showed the Denisovans to be more technologically advanced than Homo sapiens or Neanderthals. No problem there. I have no problem with that statement if it were true, okay, if it had any validity whatsoever. And I like the next sentence. It says, scientists found that a hole had been drilled in part of the bracelet with such precision that it could only have been done with high rotation drills similar to those used today. Okay, so these folks, what are they saying? They're saying that the Denisovans, okay, that these animals, these hunter-gatherers of the Upper Paleolithic, that they made that bracelet, that fine bracelet, and they drilled holes in it with what, a high-speed drill? Yeah, sure. Something is wrong. Okay? Something is definitely wrong. And I can't find the reference again. I'm going to still look for it, but I found a paper that states that they confused or they mixed one of the layers, or maybe a couple of the layers in the Denisovan cave. Like the 11th level with some other level, with a third level, something like that. There was a mixture. And that's important because if something like that happened, even remotely, okay, they could be confusing something that happened in the Neolithic, maybe anywhere from 5 to 15,000 years ago, with what happened in the Upper Paleolithic when you're talking about up to 50,000 years ago. So that's some confusion there. Okay, so very important to get down to the bottom of that. And again, they don't talk too much about that bracelet. Should be a tremendous find. I mean, if that bracelet is 50,000 years, 50,000 years old, then it should be a seminal paper. Should be groundbreaking discovery, and nobody talks about it. They just mention it in passing, and that makes me suspicious. Also, why wouldn't they harp on something so important, such an important find? Okay, so it makes you kind of wonder how they play around with all this. And here's a pendant that they found, also along the same lines. It's got that little hole drilled in there. It says direct radiocarbon dating of Upper Paleolithic tooth pendants and bone points yielded the earliest evidence for the production of these artifacts in northern Eurasia. Again, they're talking about primarily Russia, okay, between 43 and 49,000 years ago, okay. And I like that last sentence. It says, it is not currently possible to determine whether anatomically modern humans were involved in their production. Yeah, like how anatomically modern humans, like those working in Moscow today, maybe they drill those holes. I mean, I don't know. I have a hard time believing that any animal 50,000 years ago made little holes like that. For what? For what purpose? For ornamentation? Well, that's what they say, that they did these things like hung them around themselves or whatever. I have a hard time believing that they made these things. Harder time believing they made needles. They had no need for needles, so there was no need to make them. Okay, and I'm wondering what they use as thread. I mean, if you're going to make a little needle with a little hole, they got to get some kind of string or thread to go through that hole. I think that's an even bigger jump. We didn't discover that until much later. So I have a problem with all this stuff. Then these people are trying to sell you the notion that animals in the past used clothes. Okay? And we're talking about animals, just like I'm saying. Okay? Won't take away from that. They were two-legged animals, but they were animals in the worst sense of the word. Okay. First needle, as far as I'm concerned, the Kostenki needle dates to anywhere. Again, wide range here. See, the other one has a very close range. It's farther back in time. This one is closer to us, but it's got a wider range. Anywhere between 20 and 36,000 years ago. That makes a lot more sense because if humans, like I make the assumption of, entered Europe somewhere around anywhere between 35 and 40,000 years ago, this would fall right at the limit where we could find needles. Okay, and that means that why? Because they had to invent clothes, they had to sew these clothes, and someone came up with the idea of the needle. I don't think they had any need for clothes before then. I don't think they wore clothes until they got into Europe, and that's when clothes were invented. Neanderthals never knew anything about clothes. Neither did Heidelberg, because if Neanderthals needed clothes, well, what happened to the Heidelbergs who came a couple 100,000 years before them? How about the Homo erectus, which was already in Western Europe somewhere around anywhere from 800,000 to 1 million years ago? So if like you get to the caves of Atapuerca in Spain, and they found antecessor, and he dates to 800,000 years ago. How did that fellow live in the cold? Did he have needles also? Did he also use clothes? I don't think so. I think these animals, these two-legged animals, they went up there, these gorillas, and eventually got used to the cold, and they gave birth to Heidelberg, who gave birth to Neanderthal, and so on down the line. I don't think any of these wore clothes any more than a polar bear wears clothes. So no, no needles. I think the first needle came with humans. Okay, but let's get to these Denisovans. Who are these folks? Okay, and here's the map. Okay, the Denisovan cave is right there on the mid-southern part of Russia, close to Mongolia and Kazakhstan. And then they found 4 bones essentially there, 4 sets of bones, 3 teeth, 3 molars, and 1 pinky phalanx. And then in China, a couple years ago, they found a mandible, and they say that's also a Denisovan. So assuming they are all Denisovans, well, we're talking about a region in, you could say, Eastern or Central Asia there, where these Denisovans lived. Okay, very possible. I have no problem with that. Were these the same thing, same types of animals as Neanderthals? Could they mate with humans? I would say no and no. I don't think they had anything to do with either one, and maybe they weren't the only ones, the only types of humans or humanoids or homos over there that those are the ones we know about. Maybe there were more. I mean, again, I look at the Middle East the Levant, Israel, Iraq, Syria. They have caves where they say they found Neanderthals. But those Neanderthals are different than the Neanderthals, the classical Neanderthals of Germany, France, England, and Spain. They're different. They notice differences. Okay, if there are differences, maybe this was another species that was out there in the Middle East. Maybe they had nothing to do with humans. So we got to look at all this. Where are these Neanderthals? And again, I think we may be missing. Like they found Florensis in the Philippines relatively recently, and they said these little men were living on an island. Island dwarfism affected them, so they were small. They were like pygmies. Okay, and they were isolated from humanity. It's like a different species. And I'm sure something similar existed, in the Upper Paleolithic. There was probably a mosaic of different types of humans in different parts of the world. Primarily, I would say, judging just by the evidence that we have, if I were to formulate a hypothesis, an assumption, I would say, well, right now at least I can divide them in three groups. We can say there's the Denisovans, at least in Central Asia. I would say Southwestern Asia, Middle East, some other animal, maybe somewhere genealogically between humans and Neanderthals. Out west, Western Europe, Neanderthals. South Africa, we have humans. And I think that we had this mosaic, and I think if we were to find more bones, we would probably find that there were quite a bit of differences between all these human-like creatures that lived in those days. So that's my take on that. Based on the evidence that we have today, that's all you can formulate, or that at least that's what I formulate as far as an assumption. Okay, this is what they found in those two regions, the one in Russia and the one in China. The first five that are on the upper and to the left, okay, is that your left? Yeah, I think it's your left. Those are all from the Denisovan cave. And then the one at the bottom, the mandible, that's what they found a couple of years ago in the Baixia Karst cave in China. Okay, and you can see I put the dates there, approximately when these so-called individuals, for lack of a better word, these Denisovans, as they say, lived. Okay, and there's quite a bit of spread. Apparently, there were different hominids using the cave at different points in time. That's possible. I think they have like 22 levels over there in that cave. They're looking for stuff at different levels, see what they can find in each one. And this is what they found so far. This is it. This is all we have from the Denisovans. There you have it, all up to today, 2021. Okay, this is all we have. And the question is if these are the same as the Neanderthals. Okay, especially the ones that are said to be Neanderthals. For example, there you see number 11, and that's supposed to be a mixture, a half-breed between a Neanderthal and a Denisovan. Okay, a girl, apparently 13 years old, and they say that's a little bone from, they don't really know where, they think it's maybe from a femur or who knows where. But the point is they did a DNA analysis on these, and well, these are their conclusions so far. But again, they look at interbreeding because that's so popular among geneticists who have taken over the Neanderthal extinction business. Okay. Okay, so here we have the Altai Neanderthal. Okay, and the Altai Neanderthal is that Denisova 5, and that bone there, that orange bone on the upper left that you see there, 120,000 years ago. They say that Neanderthal does not really match the Neanderthals in the West. There are differences, many differences, genetic differences, okay? And there I put a sample of one of the Western Neanderthals, okay, just for reference. But the point is that bone there would not fit the guy in the lower right. That's my argument, okay? So these bones, they say they're Neanderthals because they're closely related to the Neanderthals. In other words, there's similarities, like there's similarities between us and the Neanderthals. Does that mean we had sex with them? No. Does that mean that these guys had sex with the Neanderthals? No, maybe it's another creature out there for all we know, a different species. Okay? But they say they call them Neanderthals. And so they talk about the Altai Neanderthal. Okay? And so they say, oh, the Neanderthals went all the way to the east and probably beyond the Denisovan cave. Right now we're stuck at the Denisovan cave, but tomorrow they find one in China, maybe in Beijing or Shanghai or wherever, and they're going to stretch the Neanderthal empire all the way to China. I don't think that ever happened. I think the Neanderthals did not go that far east. If I were to guess, they stopped somewhere around between the Caspian and the Black Sea, somewhere there, and up north of a certain line. I don't think they even went south, like to Iran and Saudi Arabia or the Middle East. I don't think Neanderthals went that far south. They had no need to go down there. They had enough food up north. They were born in the cold, and polar bears don't usually migrate to the equator. And I think that's why Neanderthals would have never gone that far south. Okay, that's my take on that. Let me get this one out of here. Okay, let me show you some teeth comparisons so that you can see why I also have doubts that the Denisovans had anything at all to do with either humans or Neanderthals. Okay, I think they were a totally different species of some kind of two-legged hominid of some kind, but they were so different that they would not have been able to mate with either Neanderthals or humans. Okay, and you can see it from the teeth. Here's Denisovans 4 and 8, and they have monster teeth compared to both Neanderthals and humans. Their molars were very big. And you say, well, what kind of creature had these teeth? Because here you're talking about a creature that those teeth, they belong to a different age. You're talking about even before the days of Heidelberg. By that, I don't mean that the Denisovans dated from that time. What I'm saying, they had a level of development very closely related to something between a Heidelberg and Homo erectus. So their teeth really matched something along the lines of, I don't know, I would say maybe Homo erectus, some creature that lived in those days. And I'll give you an example here. Okay, here's an example. Here's a mouth of a chimp, and then you have Australopithecus afarensis and a human. You can see that their teeth are different, okay? And the size is important to look at here. And I'm saying that these Denisovans had teeth more closely related to afarensis than they had to humans, or even to Neanderthals, which approached the mouth set or the set of teeth that humans had. These guys were more like afarensis. And you may say, well, what did afarensis look like? I mean, was he anything similar, anywhere similar to us? Well, here it is. This is what afarensis looks like. So if these guys had big molars like afarensis, well, maybe I would say that maybe you're talking about a two-legged monkey of some kind, some gorilla that was out there. That was a Denisovan. To say that Denisovans look more or less like Neanderthals or humans, I don't know. I have grave doubts about that. And that they would have sex in the wild when everybody fears everybody else and everybody attacks everybody else in the wild without 911 there to protect anyone. No laws. It's just the law of the strongest. And so, yeah, I would say that there would not have been a powwow where they all meet and they trade squaws and they all have sex with them. You know, I have grave doubts. This is what they need to explain. See, these folks, they jump to conclusions because of genetic evidence, again. And they say, oh, there's so much commonality between this animal and this animal, they had sex. Well, you know, we have commonality with chimps, with orangutans, even with gorillas. If you look at our DNA, we have some commonality. Does that mean we had sex with them? Can we have sex with a chimp? Well, you know, they try to make that human Z, human and chimpanzee, a mixture in the 1920s, Russian guy, and he failed. You can't put a chimp together with a human and come up with a third type of species. It doesn't work that way. Nothing comes out. And so again, to say that humans mated with Neanderthals is more or less the same thing. We were separated by hundreds of thousands of years separation, but it's not so much the time, I think. There's something more important, which is the environment. Neanderthals grew in cold Arctic weather. They probably still had I imagine them as the woolly man. They probably had hairs like the woolly mammoth or the woolly rhinoceros. They probably had hairs all over, part of their protection against the cold. Maybe they acquired it, maybe they never lost it, because maybe Homo erectus already was a woolly kind of guy, and he went out there and it was cold and it helped protect them, and it just developed even further until Neanderthals were completely immune to the cold. They never knew what cold was. They had no reason to invent clothes, certainly not from 200, 300,000 years ago, which is when they are assumed to have been born in Europe. So from day one, they started building clothes. Oh, it's so cold out there. No. And did they have fire? Yeah, they probably had fire. I think they did. I make that assumption. And did they use it for warmth? I think they used it primarily to cook their food, if that's maybe what they used it for. And more important than that, for protection. They probably used it as a weapon. That's what they used fire for. Humans did the same thing. Okay, we had fire. Did we need fire in Africa, in the equator? I don't think so. Not for warmth. We probably used it to defend ourselves. We realized that animals were scared of that. We came to that conclusion and said, hey, I can use this as I can scare the lion away with this. Okay, so I think it was used primarily as a weapon. Okay, what's all this about? I'm saying all this is about genetics. And what do I mean by that? I mean it's politics. 150% politics. What happened was in 1990 all the way to 2003, for 13 years, they developed this Human Genome Project. Okay, a lot of money went into that. Okay, and the bottom line was that it was to create this genomic revolution. Okay, and if you look at it, the Human Genome Project, there was a study done out there, what benefits we got out of that. And today they've got this number where they say that, in fact, Obama mentioned in one of his speeches there, saying that they got $140 for every $1 invested. Okay, in different branches, this ballooned, this genome project, okay? And so today, this industry is empowering further scientific discovery, progress, and commercial innovation on a broad range of fronts, from human healthcare to veterinary medicine, from industrial biotechnology to high productivity agriculture. And the main one, which concerns us here, is the Neanderthal extinction. Why am I mentioning that? Well, because it turns out that for many years, I would say at least for 50 years, if not more, they've been arguing, the paleontologists, so-called paleontologists, they've been arguing about how the Neanderthals became extinct. How did they go away? And the issue was that we had essentially three currents. One was climate change, so popular today, everybody talks about climate change. The other one is that humans killed them, we killed them off. And another one is that we outcompeted them, and they kind of imploded because of that, because we muscled in on their territory. They could not compete with us, partly because the weather changed. We had protection, they did not, or we had more resistance, maybe resistance to bugs. We outcompeted them. So those were the three groups, big groups. There were smaller groups as well, but those were the three big ideas, and they were fighting amongst themselves. And then comes 1990, the Genome Project. What did they do? Well, they went in there, and in 2003, they finished the human genome. Okay, they got all these molecules in the right place. They had them all mapped out. They put them in computers, so now we could reference them. And guess what? 2007, we had this gentleman, Svante Pavo, and he was named by Times Magazine as one of the 100 most influential people of that year. And why did they do that? Because Svante took charge of the Genome Project at the Max Planck Institute in Germany. And what they were going to do, they were going to pull bones from Neanderthals, and they're going to do a genome. In other words, they're going to look at all the molecules that make up the DNA, etc., of a Neanderthal. And so they could map that out and then compare it against the Human Genome Project, the results that we have from there. And in 3 years, from 2007 to 2010, they finally finished the project. They published their findings, and their findings were that there was approximately 2% commonality between humans and Neanderthals, and it was due to what? Well, they said at the time it was speculative, but speculation became law, fact, proof. And today we have that version, which is, no, we did not kill the Neanderthal. We did not outcompete them. It wasn't climate change. What was it? It was we loved them to death. We loved them to death. What had happened was that they say we had sex with them massively, everywhere, in all their crawls. We went in there, had sex with their women. They had sex with our females, right? We had great parties, exchanged genes, okay, beer as well, okay? And, okay, so once they got together, what happened? How come the Neanderthals are not around today? Well, they said there's a smaller population, maybe a 10-to-1 ratio between 10 humans for every 1 Neanderthals. We outnumbered them so much that their population kind of diluted in ours. And then from that time onwards, for the last 40,000 years, we lost a lot of their genes, and we ended up with the 2% we have today. That's the general story. Okay. The other version is that our great grandfathers, sometime maybe anywhere from 500 to 800,000 years ago, they separated, which was what? Homo erectus. One guy went to Europe, the other guy went to, or was already in Africa. This guy developed into something called Homo rhodesiensis, which was similar to Homo heidelbergensis in Europe. Okay, and from there came Neanderthal in Europe and humans in Africa. We migrated to Europe, and maybe we met the Neanderthals, maybe they died and we just conquered their territory because there was no one to present opposition. Those are the stories. And so the question is, maybe we have 2% because that's all that's left after 800,000 years in which the Homo erectus branched out. One stayed in Africa, the other went to Europe. That's it. That's why we have 2%. Okay, so there should be no more than that. But they said, no, we had sex. Why? Because, first of all, they had to show that they had to justify the 2%. That's one issue. But that's the least of the issues. The big issue was we had to create jobs for geneticists. Let me repeat that. We had to create jobs for geneticists. And there was this big fight in Neanderthal paleontology, and they came in there and they just took over. They wiped out all the paleontologists and say, you guys are all ignorant, you know nothing. We're going to tell you how the Neanderthals disappeared. And we're going to do it through genetic analysis. So they went in there, okay, and they did their counting because what is a geneticist? He's a mathematician, nothing but. He's a lab boy. Okay, let me make that clear. He only knows how to count molecules. He does it through a computer. He doesn't even have to use his head. He's got all these things out there already mapped out. And from there, they draw conclusions. And the conclusions, they said, oh, we know. We had sex with them. Okay, I don't care about their data. I don't care about their DNA. I don't care about any of that. I'll concede it. I'll grant it. I want to know how it happened in the wild. And you won't find a single paper. Listen what I'm telling you. You won't find a single paper in paleontology where it says how they did it in the wild, how they came across each other, how that could have developed. I mean, you would think at least they would come up with a theory. There's nothing out there, absolutely nothing. All they do, every time you look at a paper dealing with the extinction of the Neanderthals, it's DNA, 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 genetics, DNA. That's all you'll find. You won't find anything else today. And that's a problem. That's a serious problem because it means they've already ruled, they already decided that Neanderthals mated with us and they disappeared because they dissolved in our bigger population. Period. We're done, never to be talked about again. Okay, and so the paleontologists, the guys who study paleontologists, they go out into the field, they pull a bone out and they say, oh, look, this bone is different than that one. We don't care. We don't care if they're different. Genetics tells us they mated and that's it. And so we got a problem between the people, traditional paleontologists who said, well, you know, I looked at these bones and they look so different. How could these two hominids have had sex if they're so different? And the other guy said, we don't care about any of that. We don't know anything about bones. All we know is about DNA. And DNA says we have 2%, and we wouldn't have 2% if it weren't that they had sex. We're done. That's it. That's all you'll hear about from now on. And then they branched off into more and more little things like, oh, the diseases we inherited from Neanderthals, the ones we gave to them. And they go through all this nonsense about, you know, what color hair or eyes they had. A bunch of nonsense. We don't have a theory for extinction. That's what paleontology is about. That's what we want to know about the Neanderthals. And we don't have a mechanism of how this happened in the wild. How did the tiger and the lion meet in the wild and have, you know, what is it, Tigon or what is it? I always get it wrong. The Tigon or the Lias. Okay, how do you get these two animals to mix in the wild? That's what we want to know. Okay, does a lion sleep with a leopard? Does a lion sleep with a panther? Does a lion sleep with a tiger? Maybe in the zoo, under control of humans. Yeah, we can all believe that. The question is, how did they do that in the wild? Especially apex predators. See, what they always give you as examples are herbivores. Some animal out there say, well, here we saw this, and we think, because again, it's all inference. We haven't seen it in the wild. But they infer, because of DNA, that this animal came from these other two. And I talked about that in the past, where you have the red wolf, which is supposedly a mixture between wolves and coyotes. And this animal came out, they say, okay, called the red wolf. And again, it was all politics, because what was the issue? The issue was that there were some people who wanted to protect the red wolf, which is in almost becoming extinct. They wanted to protect it. It turns out the law does not protect hybrids. It only protects original species. And so there was another group that said, oh, we don't want to protect the red wolf because it's not an original species. It's not an authentic species. It's a half-breed, and we can always come up with a half-breed by breeding a wolf with a coyote. it turns out that they never put a wolf and a coyote in the same cage. Poor coyote. In fact, you'll see there's a couple of YouTube videos shows how wolves treat coyotes. They tear them to pieces with their mouths. That's the amount of sex. That's how much love they have for them. So no, I don't think a wolf ever raped a coyote in the wild. But this is what they say is the red wolf, a mixture of wolves and coyotes. And since there's more than one, and there were more in the past, we have to assume lots of wolves had sex with lots of coyotes, when the wolf is an animal that works as a pack, whereas a coyote is a lonely animal. Again, it's like the tiger, which is a lonely cat, whereas the lion is a social cat. And there are too many differences for them. Even if you put them in the same regional, same geographic region of the planet, it would never happen. They'd be fighting, they'd be killing each other. And that's what happens with the wolves and coyotes. So again, they wanted to protect, one group wanted to protect the red wolf because they say, oh, it's an original species. And the other one said, no, it's a half-breed, so we're not going to protect it because the law doesn't protect it. And so it's all politics. It's got to do with one side asking for money and pulling in his direction compared to the other group. And if we can't tell about the red wolf today, which is still alive, how can you tell about Neanderthal and Denisovans when we're talking about 50,000 years ago? We're not even, we don't even have it in front of us to be able to carry out an experiment or anything like that. It's all deduction. And all the deduction is from genetics. Why? Because these people had to have a job. And what the geneticists have done, these mathematicians who count atoms and molecules, what they've done, they've taken over the paleontology, Neanderthal paleontology business. That's what happened. A lot of paleontologists are not too happy about that. Anyways, here's one article, and this was from, NBC News. It says, were Neanderthals a separate species? Scientists say yes, by a nose. Okay? And it says, one team of specialists says Neanderthals' nasal anatomy proves they were a species of their own. Their whole nose thingy, respiratory tracts, etc., were totally different than humans. Okay, by looking at a complete morphological pattern, we can conclude that Neanderthals are our close relatives, but they are not us. Okay, so that's one opinion, one group that says no, these guys were not us. Here's another one says what are the differences? Okay. Says the physical traits of Homo sapiens include a high and rounded globular brain case and relatively narrow pelvis. Okay, so our pelvis, our brain case, totally different. You can see there's some comparison. Does that guy on the left look like the guy on the right? Do you need to be a paleontologist to be able to tell me those two guys are different? You really need to go to school to tell me that? I mean, you should be able to take a look and find out one thing. There's no chin on the Neanderthal. He doesn't have this indentation. No other hominid has the indentation except humans. Okay, and we have the indentation there, and Neanderthal does not. Heavy eyebrows. Okay, ours are kind of, whittled out. They're shaved. The brain case, very different. Okay, they have more like a gorilla brain case. Okay, and there were other differences among them. They're saying again the nasal passages totally different. Okay, it says measurement of our brain case and pelvic shape can reliably separate a modern human from a Neanderthal. Their fossils exhibit a longer lower skull and a wider pelvis. Even the three tiny bones of our middle ear, vital in hearing, can be readily distinguished from those of Neanderthals with careful measurement. In fact, the shape differences in the ear bones are more marked, on average, than those that distinguish our closest living relatives, chimpanzees and gorillas, from each other. We had more differences with Neanderthals than chimps and gorillas have between them. And as a chimp, can you tell the difference between a chimp and a gorilla? Do you think a chimp could tell the difference between a gorilla and his species? Or a gorilla, can he tell the difference between a chimp and gorillas? I think they would. And here's one of the gurus of paleontology, of classical paleontology. His name is Chris Stringer. Okay, says the problem is not with Neanderthals and modern humans and all other species that interbreed with each other. No, they don't. But with the biological species concept itself. It is only one of dozens of suggested species concepts. They have different notions of what a species is. That's what he's saying. And one that is less useful in the genomic age. Right. Genome, yeah, talking about genes. Those are the geneticists. They've taken over, so now all they talk about is genes. And this guy says, look, this notion of species has to be clarified because we have so many notions of species. And right now, the one we're using is not very useful, especially in this days of geneticists. With its profuse demonstrations of interspecies mixing. Yeah, that's all they talk about, admixture, interbreeding. If Neanderthals and Homo sapiens remain separate long enough to evolve such distinctive skull shapes, okay, listen to that, pelvises and ear bones, they can be regarded as different species, interbreeding or not. Well, the only problem I got with Mr. Stringer is that he's saying they can be regarded as different species whether they interbred or not. Very wrong. That's a wrong argument, Mr. Stringer. Okay? And this is the problem. The problem is they wash away the definitions. They want to continue just talking. And what they're doing is politics at that point and religion, because you have to define the damn word species. You have to use it consistently. You can't just keep going back and forth and saying, well, I think they were the same species, but they could not interbreed, or vice versa. There were two different species, but they could interbreed. They had admixture. They passed genes to each other. I guess, with like a tennis ball, you pass the genes over. No, you got to define the word species. If you don't have a definition for the word species, you're going to go around in circles, and that's what Mr. Stringer is doing here. He's kind of not, he's skirting the issue. He's got to insist on the word species. Let me tell you why. There's a very popular word among geneticists in the context of Neanderthals, right? And it's called introgression. Introgression means that two species, different species, can have a child, a viable child. And let's put the definitions out there. I got two of them. They essentially say the same thing. Introgression, the transfer of genetic information from one species to another. Okay? Introgression, Wikipedia says the transfer of genetic material from one species into the gene pool of another. This process is distinct from most forms of gene flow in that it occurs between what? Two populations of different species. Okay? So what do we mean by species then? I mean, if introgression is sex between two different species, well, let's find out what the word species means, right? Okay, here we have it. What is a species? These are the definitions you'll find. Species, a group of living organisms consisting of similar individuals capable of exchanging genes or interbreeding. Species, a group of organisms that can reproduce naturally with one another and create fertile offspring. And species, the largest group of organisms in which any two individuals of the appropriate sexes or mating types can produce fertile offspring. What is a species? Two animals that can reproduce successfully. In other words, viable children, meaning that they're not sterile. We got that? That's the definition. So what is this nonsense about introgression of sex, viable, reproductive, productive, and what's the word I'm looking for? Well, that they can produce offspring that can also have children. Okay? So you have to have two individuals that can have sex and have a child that is not what's the word that can have a child that is also successful. Okay, that's the point. And we have a contradiction then between the term introgression and the word species, because introgression means two different species can have a child, and species means that only two from the same species can have a child. So there's a contradiction between the word introgression and the word species. That's my point. Okay, we have a contradiction, it's an oxymoron. That's what introgression means, and this is the word that's being used right now by geneticists to peddle their admixture theory. So you have to, every time a geneticist uses the word introgression, you have to question that. You have to question him and say, hold it, what do you mean introgression? You mean two species, different species can have a child. A tiger can have a child, a viable, a healthy child that can also reproduce, a fertile child with a tiger. Is that what you're saying? And this is where we have the problem, okay? Okay, so just in case, we need to know also what is a race, okay? Because we use this word race, okay? Race, the idea that human species is divided into distinct groups on the basis of inherited physical and behavioral differences. What is race? It's a political term. Only humans have races. There are no races in fish, in gorillas, any apes, no races among buffalo. No one has race except humans because it's a political word. It's, the guy's black, he's a different race. Can you have sex with him? Can you have viable children with someone from a different race? Of course you can. You can have, a white guy like me can have viable sex with a woman in Japan, with a woman in Africa or Russia or South America, because we're the same species. Our genes are so closely related that there would be no problem in having children. That's a different matter than saying, me having sex with a chimp and having a child, a human Z. I don't think that'll ever happen. Even if I don't care how drunk you find me, I don't think it'll ever happen. Okay, so here's my version of these two words. You can take this to the bank. Okay. How do I define these words? Well, I'm saying species, successful breeding. That's what it means. What do we mean by that? It says, what won't know until they bred, because, it's a retroactive kind of definition. First, you have to have the child and say, oh, yeah, they were of the same species, in retrospect. That's the way the word species works, because that's the way it's defined. Successful breeding. If you don't breed and never had a child in your life, well, maybe you don't know if you're part of our species, our human species, because the word species means successful breeding, and so far you haven't bred. So what does that mean? That you're not part of our species because you didn't have a child yet? Okay, is a kid who is 11 years old, hasn't had a child, hasn't had children yet, is he of the same species? Well, we don't know. We got to wait till he grows up. So if they produce sterile offspring, sterile, that's the word I was looking for, sterile offspring, they are not the same species, known as genetic drift. Okay, so if they have sex and they cannot have a viable child because their genes are so different, you may not know that, but God, Mother Nature, Father Universe, the devil, one of those guys knows that your genes are not the same. That's why the kid didn't come out, or didn't come out right. Okay? Now, if they breed successfully, they were, in retrospect, the same species. What is race? Cosmetic differences within a species. Typically, it's a political term. Okay? We don't use the words race usually in terms of animals. Okay, they do have that in horse racing. Yeah, I guess you might see some examples here and there. They talk about races of horses and so on. But in general, it's a term that's used among humans. And again, even with horses and so on, if they mate, they are successful. That means that they're just different races within the same species. And so the question is whether humans and Neanderthals were different species or different races within the same species, meaning that they could mate and have successful children. If their children would have come out sterile, we would not be able to have had any DNA that related to Neanderthals. But if we have 2%, well, that can just as well, in fact, more than likely, be related to the fact that we had a common ancestor sometime, I don't know, between 500 and a million years ago, 500,000, 1 million years ago. That would explain it. Denisovans, are they part of our species? No, I think they were a separate animal, maybe lived out there the last of his days somewhere in Russia, and they were probably a relatively small population, and they finally became extinct because they had been around for thousands of years until what? Their population pyramid overturned and they lost their genetic diversity. One thing that we can almost put our hand in the fire, when they do genetic analysis for Neanderthals and Denisovans, they say they had lost by that time. By the time they were gone, they had lost their genetic diversity. What a coincidence. That's exactly the theory. Okay, another subject someone brought up, the Sentinelese from Sentinel Island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Okay, Sentinelese, he spelled it wrong. Islanders are isolated for the last 60,000 years, and they have not any genetic diversity. They have lost. They may have lost their genetic diversity because we don't know. We haven't done really a study of the Sentinelese, partly because these people hate anyone who comes to their island. It tries to kill them. Okay, and they have lost their genetic diversity long before because of inbreeding. Yet they continue. So if there are isolated pockets of humans after the economic collapse, why can't they continue? Why can't they reproduce? Okay, good question. They can restart just like in the Dark Ages, or maybe in a forest tribe, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so this fellow is asking, why can't these Sentinelese reproduce, and even though they may have lost their genetic diversity, but they can still reproduce and continue. Okay, and what is he talking about? Well, these are the Sentinelese so that you can see them, and they hate, again, any visitors. Okay, they're still using their bow and arrows. That picture on the upper right is when they killed someone, and they went, missionaries that went down there and got killed, and they weren't going to punish these folks because, these guys are Indians. Indians, they're what they are, they're natives of that island. They've been there for quite a while, and they don't know any better, so there's no reason to kill them or punish them in any way. The Indian government, which owns the island, tries to protect them from outsiders. But the point is that these folks, as you can see there on the lower left, they're shooting their bows, their arrows at the helicopter. They see this flying monster, they don't know what it is. And so what happens? These folks, they're very few today. In fact, they're really on their way out. In other words, even though we protect them, they're more than likely going to become extinct because they're having fewer children. There were like 3,000 Sentinelese in the 19th century. Today, there's only a few hundred. 200, 300, 400. They don't really know how many there are. They really think it's between 150 and 200 individuals. That's it. That's all that's on an island. And that's not too many. which means that, they're apparently they've shrunk. Their population has shrunk drastically. It's probably not going to last long, especially if first their population pyramid overturned, assuming, right? They're maybe having fewer children than they used to have in the past. That's one. And the other one is they probably lost their genetic diversity from inbreeding. I mean, from 200 individuals, how much genetic diversity can you get? Okay, so yeah, they're probably on their way out. If we left them alone long enough, I think they would be wiped out all by themselves. So no, I don't think they would recover, no matter how many children they have. And they cannot have too many children because maybe there's not enough to hunt out there. Okay, so there are constraints, food constraints. Okay, this is how they think this fellow talked about 60,000 years. What is he talking about? Well, apparently, you see these Sentinelese, they're black, and they think they came out of Africa. Okay, this is the closest they got to figuring out where these folks came from. And they probably started some migration, maybe sometime around 60,000 years ago, went along the coast, maybe by land, maybe by sea with canoes or who knows what. And they went all around the Indian perimeter there and eventually ended up in Australia. And sometime maybe around 60,000 years ago, they went into that circle where the Sentinelese island are. Really, it's got a different name. Here it is. You can see they're called the Andaman and the Andaman Islands. And I've circled there the North Sentinelese Island, which is where these violent Sentinelese live. You can see the island there blow up. Okay. And so there's like 200 individuals living on that island. They're protected by the Indian government, again. And so the question is, can they survive? Or will they become extinct? And I would say that if left long enough, they would become extinct. Okay. I'm saying there are also no lost tribes because people mention, well, there could be some tribe out there that is not connected to our world. So if the global economy collapses, right, money is no more, we don't believe in money anymore, and God we don't trust anymore, that won't affect the hunter-gatherers out there. The question is, or what I'd like to say is that there are no lost tribes on Earth. We found them all. Okay, so don't be surprised tomorrow they say, oh, we found a new tribe somewhere. No, it's not going to happen. We found them all. We got satellites, for those of you who are not flat earthers. Yeah, we have satellites going around the Earth. We focused on every little island, every rock that exists here on Earth. We know where everybody's at. And here I went to visit a tribe, the Ticunas in the Amazon River. That was about 30 years ago. These were my girlfriends. Okay, and these were still peaceful, but there was a tribe further deeper in the jungles, and they advised us not to go there because, we might get killed, just like these Sentinelese. They'll attack you. And so, yeah, but we know they're there. So it's not like, you're going to be surprised by new tribes. And those tribes, a lot of them don't live anymore out of just hunting and gathering. A lot of them have been approached already, especially by missionaries. They trade. They've got some rapport, you could say, some trading, some contact with the civilized world. And so they're not completely isolated. We know where they're at. And anyways, I don't think they're going to survive if the global economy collapses because people are just going to go out there and hunt whatever they hunted first. They're going to wipe out whatever animals out there that these people hunt. So there's going to be competition for the animals in the jungle. And I think people who are better armed and who are willing to go to the jungle, they're going to be using rifles. These guys are going to go with bows and arrows and knives. Well, who do you think is going to win? And after those folks kill the animals, I think they're just going to kill the natives. So the natives, it's not like the natives are going to survive because the rest of the world collapse. It's not going to happen like that. There's going to be no pockets there that humans are not going to go into. Humans who live nearby, in other words, they're going to go in there and they're going to try to hunt whatever they can hunt so they can live another day. So we're going to become hunter-gatherers. People from the towns and cities near those jungles, they're just going to go out there and hunt whatever they can, including another human. So no, I don't think it's going to happen that lost tribes are going to survive. Okay, another subject. Person says, your thoughts on CO2 and global warming? Well, yeah, we're polluting a lot of stuff. Do we affect the climate? Well, I have to believe that 8 billion people throwing all kinds of stuff out there in the air, we have to be affecting, to a certain degree, we have to be affecting the atmosphere, of course. What's my objection to this notion of climate change and pollution? I'm saying it's got nothing to do with nothing. It's got nothing to do with extinction. We're not going to become extinct because we're polluting the air. We can stop today doing anything about climate change or pollution because it doesn't matter anyways. We're not going to die because of pollution. We're not going to die because of climate change. We're going to die because the global economy is going to fall down to pieces. When, not if, when that happens, when money is no more, when money, you can't buy anything, no one will accept your money in any way, shape, or form, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's the fiat money, whether it's gold, or even anything you can think of, your car that you want to trade, no one will accept trade because money is no more. And the only thing of value will be food. And no one in his right mind, right? In the jungle, in the asphalt jungle, trades food. You don't trade food when you're at subsistence level. You keep all the food and try to take as much as you can from wherever, including killing, murdering, robbing, cannibalizing, whatever is necessary to keep you alive. So food is the most, all animals understand that. The only people who don't understand are humans. But all other animals out there, tigers, lions, they all understand this. They know that food is of the most, the vital importance. Okay, that's the way it works. And humans from the cities have a lot of problem trying to understand that. That's what's incredible. They take food so much for granted. Okay, so here's pollution. Venus, CO2. You talked about CO2. Venus is covered with it. In fact, it's so much that the pressure at the surface, measured by the Veneras, the Russian Venera probes, is just outrageous. Like 400 times the pressure here on Earth at sea level, right? It's like going down deep in the ocean, several miles down there. The pressure just would break you apart, would squash you. Okay, that's how much pressure is on the surface of Venus. Why? Because it's got a very thick layer of CO2, okay, carbon dioxide. And will the Earth turn into that? Probably, yes, but I would have to give it a few million years for that to happen, for Earth to be like Venus. Okay, I don't think it'll happen before then. Meanwhile, throw all the dirt you want out there. Don't worry about polluting. Don't worry about the climate. It doesn't have anything at all to do with anything. Period. That's it. That's my 10 cents worth. Okay. We're going to die because of the economy, not because of climate change. So please don't worry about climate change anymore. You're wasting your time. Climate change is just politics right now. Okay. So what do the plankton and conifers have in common that causes them to go extinct at the same time? Okay. Plankton being sea, conifers being, on the land. So referring to the fact that dinosaurs died on land, mosasaurs and ammonites, which eventually relied on plankton, they disappeared in the seas. And the mosasaurs and the dinosaurs more or less went out at the same time, geologically speaking, right? Maybe there was a few thousand years difference, but essentially they died at the same time. We cannot determine that at the rock level. It's too nebulous, okay, to say precisely. But yeah, they disappeared at the same time. The question is for you to answer the question. Yeah, I have an answer, but I'm not going to share it with you yet. I want people to think about this. And someone gave it a try. Okay, this is what his fellow says. He said it the other day, but he's insisting one more time. Okay, he's going to try to improve on what he said last time. He says, imagine a tiny sea creature, A, is eaten by another sea creature, B, and B is eaten by another sea creature, C, and C by D, and so on, creating a food chain. Okay, so far so good. Eventually there's a sea creature in that chain, R, that is eaten by a land animal, S. Aha. This animal would not be a dinosaur, mind you. It would be perhaps an amphibian or reptile, and those would be eaten by the dinosaurs and so on. So he's saying that all these, perhaps, are part of the same food chain. I don't think so. At least I have a different version, but no, I don't think they were all part of the same food chain. The food chain in the seas is typically isolated from the food chain on land. There are some animals, like crocs. They can climb on land and kill a deer. We have that. Okay, we have lions that sometimes fight with some animal that's in the seas. Can't think of one, but maybe if they found a croc. Like I think I've seen what is it? Not leopards. Some cat. Oh yeah, a pack of lions, lionesses, and they were attacking a croc that somehow got stranded on land. I'm sure they would have killed it and probably eaten it. I don't know. So there could be some animals on land that eat animals in the seas, and some animals in the seas that certainly eat animals that are on land. But I don't think that would, there's some crossover, but that crossover is that little. They don't depend on those animals. It's not because the land animals eat sea animals and sea animals eat land animals that we have extinction because one of them disappears. No, land animals in general chase after land animals. Certainly birds chase after land animals, and sea animals usually chase after sea animals. They have two different worlds. So they are two different food chains. There's some overlap, but I don't think it's so important to cause the extinction of any one side or the other, or both. Okay, anyways, keep trying. Here it is. Please do 101 Extinction 101 before you do 102, meaning please try to solve why animals on land died approximately at the same time as animals in the seas. Okay, and by that, you need to start by Extinction 101. How did animals in the past die? Get a mechanism for animals in the past. Share it with us, no problem. Okay, I want to hear different ideas, but please don't use catastrophes because those are probably not going to work. Usually catastrophes either they're not discriminatory. They cannot separate one species from another or one group, one order from another. Okay, how does an asteroid kill just the dinosaurs and leave the mammals alive? And so they've created all these other processes to account for the different, animals that disappeared. And that's like ad hoc. They have like one of the theories out there is that the asteroid fell on a pile of sulfur that was in the water, and that sulfur acidified the oceans, and some animals couldn't take it, and those died. Just sheer luck, that the asteroid happened to fall on a pile of sulfur to kill those animals in the seas. Then the other ones got killed because of, we had this this cloud covering the planet. There was no photosynthesis, so the conifers died. Only the conifers, I guess. No, all plants would have died. And they say all plants did die when there's no evidence of that, and that mammals were able to survive because they ate detritus, the leftovers of dead plants and animals for 3 or 4 years until, I guess, God created plants again. They have all these nonsensical theories.